Jordan, we've been talking about malware, ransomware, and many different things for the last year, 2 years, 3 years. But recently we talk about this more and more and more. And we always talk about fancy antivirus, firewalls. But there is a solution that can at least provide information on a basic level without pretty much buying anything. And it's called image hardening. Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, so essentially, yeah, you have all these great products that are built on top of your operating systems, on top of your other IT systems like antivirus, or even going fancier into the endpoint detection and response tools, um, which are fantastic tools. But there's one step before that that people may skip over because it takes some knowledge, it takes uh, some experience in both the IT and security space to understand the operating systems that you're working with. And it's called operating system hardening. So essentially, any sort of computer that you're getting out of the box has a lot of different use cases for it. Maybe it needs to be usable for work, for education, for gaming, lots of potential use cases. So those features tend to just be turned on by default. And things are fairly open because people want to be able to use their technology the way they want to. However, because there's a lot of complex systems and features that interact with each other, that leaves space for vulnerabilities. And essentially what OS hardening is, it's removing those features that you're not really using, turning on those higher level security features, making sure that you're using modern authentication protocols, avoiding things that may be left in there for legacy or backwards compatibility, essentially. You want to lock down your system as much as possible because it comes fairly open.
Is this something that any company can do?
Yeah, it's something that any company can do, but currently it's a bit of a pain to do because generally the way that you do this is you go and you look at hardening guides. So for example, CIS has great ones. The DSA STIGs that I think are now mostly aligned with CIS. There's some more application or service specific ones as well. But for operating systems, I think CIS is pretty standard. So you go and look at those. You look at if you have any sort of regular imaging process for your fleet of servers or endpoint or workstation endpoints, and you follow that list, you apply those settings, and then you deploy from there. Sounds simple, but then you realize that a lot of those settings, if you turn them on, if you aren't really aware of what you're doing, they get pretty technical. There's a lot of interactions between old systems, between applications that may not be built with that secure environment in mind, may not be tested entirely. And your processes and your user experience and your networks might break down if you just apply all of those settings, which is a pain. So the process of getting there, anybody can do it. You can go and look at the guides. You can go and turn on the settings that it recommends. You can do some research if you have the time for yourself, if you want to add anything else. However, that implementation piece is where it gets a little bit sticky.
Would hardening apply to Windows, Linux, and Mac?
Yep. So for the most part, I would say, and maybe this is just from my own personal experience, being that I mostly have experience attacking Windows devices, but I'd say Linux and Mac, if they're set up by default, their defaults are usually a little bit better in terms of security wise. That's changing slowly from my experience, but it applies across the board to any sort of operating system that you can harden it and increase its security posture, reduce that attack surface of what's available to take advantage of.
So why Microsoft don't have a version? We have a home use, we have a pro, already hardened image.
It's a great question. There might be one. I'm not aware of it, but if there is, I've never seen anybody actually using it. And
like if I buy a business laptop, then why it doesn't come hardened by default? Because of backward compatibility?
I would probably assume it's for that compatibility purpose, whether it be for um, processes that are already existing in those businesses. They may be using like old servers. For a big example would be an old version of SMB, which is used for a big majority of essentially that Windows-based and file system based on the network traffic. Um, Old versions of that, not encrypted. There's lots of relay vulnerabilities that you can take advantage of with those older versions of protocols, but there are a lot of legacy servers and business critical servers and applications that still require those protocols. And so I think it's a bit of that, not trying to step on toes, trying to keep things as compatible as possible, because it's more recently that security has been on the mind of buyers.
So how's hardening can help from ransomware, for example? Can you provide some examples and ideas?
Mm-hmm. So I think in order to have a strong, just general IT security program, you want to build it off of a good foundation. So you want to identify what are your assets, what sort of threats might potentially take down those assets or take advantage of those assets. What are you worried about essentially? From there, you can build out your controls of what sort of vulnerabilities should be aware of. What kind of devices are we running? Are we seeing any sort of vulnerabilities against those? And also, what can we do to build a strong foundation to prevent any sort of future vulnerabilities or mitigate that risk? Because there's always going to be vulnerabilities because these are complex systems. So when you have a whole network of these devices, yeah, maybe one computer gets hacked, maybe they get access on one, maybe they bypass an antivirus on one device. Now, I guess it's sort of a blast radius idea. If you have full access to everything from that one device that gets hacked, then it's pretty easy to move around all the other devices in your network. And all of a sudden, instead of having one device that might have ransomware on it, your entire network has ransomware on it. And that's a lot more difficult of a problem to solve. So essentially, what system hardening can do for you is make, well, let me think about how to word this. Essentially, it's limiting that blast radius by reducing how many paths and how easy of paths people can take to move laterally from one device to another. If you have full access on Joe's accounting workstation, it has domain administrator, for example, for some reason, all of a sudden that person has access to everything. They can drop ransomware on everything. But if Joe only has local user access, permissions are locked down, protocols are locked down to only what he needs to access. He can only access the accounting servers, for example. It comes back to having good design in terms of your network and access control, because the less somebody can just freely move around and take advantage of your vulnerabilities, the easier it is to either catch it or maybe even deter it from happening in the first place. Because a lot of these ransomware gangs and operators are going after either the biggest cash cows or low-hanging fruit. I don't know if you saw the most recent leak, I think, of some guides or handbooks for Conti, that ransomware group. But a lot of those techniques were pretty much straight off of, you can Google those. It's going to be how to do like a pen test or anything like that. It's not too hard to take advantage of that low-hanging fruit if there's systemic issues in your network design or your permissions.
Jordan, thank you very much. I know it's been short, probably much larger topic about automation and what else we can do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.